Currently, the word cloud API, we're seeing a sample response here. It returns the raw image data for that generated word cloud image directly in the API's response. And you can see the sample here. My team lead has decided it would be better to upload the generated image to S3 first, and then just return a link in the API's response. And to let Q develop this feature for me, I'm going to use a new command called /dev. In /dev, I can describe the feature that I'm trying to build. So I can describe the fact that I need to change the logic of my application to upload the word cloud image to S3, and instead of returning the raw image data, to return a pre-signed URL from S3. So the feature development capability looks at your entire code base and tries to figure out what are all of the different changes that I need to make. And it first comes up with a plan. So a plan describes at a high level all the changes that Q thinks it needs to make in my code base to complete this feature. So I find this plan to be so helpful, even as just a first step in my own development tasks, because it's really helping me to sort of navigate what are all the changes here that I need to make. So you can use this planning standalone when you're using /dev. And you can use it to sort of help you to tackle a task and then jump into coding yourself. But the next step is letting Q do the coding for us. This is not actually available yet. It's coming soon, but I wanted to give you a little sneak peek of what happens. So here in the plan, it's called out all the different classes that it needs to update, all the different files it needs to update. And when I click write code, it's going to go off and generate that code and then come back with a diff for me. So I can inspect each file to see what I think of the changes. So Q has added the code for the S3 client within the generator class. It uses that client to upload the image to the bucket defined by the bucket name environment variable. And it's also updating the API model to return the URL as well. So here it's changed my API model to add a different field. And here it's also attempted to update the unit tests. So this is one of the really great parts of this sort of holistic feature development capability is that it also writes those tests for you based on what code it wrote. But I now have the opportunity to give Q some feedback about the code, to tell it what tweaks or different approaches I want to take and get the code generated again. So this is very similar to maybe how you would interact with a team member on your team as they're kind of going through their first development task, where you kind of walk them through what are the changes that you want them to make, what are the best approaches. So Q asked me, how can the code be improved? So I'm going to tell it the tweaks that I want it to make. For example, instead of having the unit test actually upload an image to S3 and then actually download it from S3, I actually want it to mock the client. It did that correctly in the failure case, but it didn't do that exactly correctly in the success case. And this is where we're sort of becoming prompt engineers, generative AI prompt engineers, where it's really important to be very clear with Q or any other AI about what it is we actually want and being very clear with our instructions. And so I found that I've gotten a little bit better over time at giving feedback to Q to get the successful code that I want. One of the other things it missed is it missed import statements for the S3 client, so this wouldn't actually build. So I'm going to go ahead and remind it about that. And I also missed updating my Maven configuration file to actually add the S3 client, add the AWS SDK as a new dependency. So now we'll see what updates Q makes to the code based on my feedback. So here it comes back with a new diff based on the new set of changes that it's made. So I can also go ahead and inspect them. And here it successfully added those missing imports that it missed the first time. It still has all the changes from the previous go-round. It still has the changes to the API model, adding that URL field. But it didn't quite get what I was asking it for in the unit test. So it didn't quite get the mocking correct. So this is an example where I could probably be a little bit clearer in my instructions, or even give fewer instructions so that it can kind of focus on doing one change at a time. And again, this is really kind of pushing the boundaries of what generative AI can do for us as developers. So we're pretty excited to get this in the hands of folks and see what you think. At this point, I can either keep iterating, I can keep giving Q some more feedback and get more diffs, or I could go ahead and sort of take the code that's kind of 80% there and apply it in my local IDE and start editing from there. So I find that even when Q doesn't get it 100% in feature development, it's still really useful for me for productivity-wise because it often takes care of a lot of boilerplate code for me, and I can just focus on tweaking the important parts. So now that I've used Q to help me make the code changes for this task, we can now see that the API response is now correctly returning a pre-signed S3 URL for the word cloud image instead of the raw image data.